Well, there was an interesting event this morning in Cape Town on a train station in Fish Hoek. Officials from Metrorail and Prasa and from the city, the Mayor Jordan Hill-Lewis, met with commuters and went on the train from Fish Hoek to the Cape Town CBD to look at the improvements on those lines. Lorenzo Davids is the CEO of the Development Impact Fund. He's also someone who is very involved in public transport. He's been taking public transport to work himself. Lorenzo, good afternoon to you. How important is something like this? Officials seeing for themselves what's happening to commuters, to have the mayor on the train standing next to you?
Yes, Stephen, good afternoon, and to your viewers as well. It was phenomenal. I think it is such a boost for a movement of active citizenship to see people like the mayor and members of his Maker Committee and members of the provincial legislature pitch up to join us on the train this morning. We were over 30 people. And I think the message it sends out, Stephen, is that public officials do enjoy using public transport. In fact, it was a blast this morning, Stephen. We were in great spirit. It was a pleasant experience, and it was certainly a message that resonated so well with commuters on the train to see the mayor and other public officials on board a train.
Do you think that officials have an accurate understanding, a real picture of what the actual situation is for people on a daily basis?
Well, I think it's an emerging understanding. I think there are perceptions from post-COVID, post-2020, pre-2020 to where we are now. I think there's a new emerging understanding of the difficulties that exist around reconfiguring rail and fixing rail. There's an appreciation for how hard the task is and how severe the damages are. And slowly, there was a great moment today on the train where the mayor and the infrastructure manager for Prasa and members of the provincial legislature agreed and said, we need to work together with each other to fix the system. It's the cheapest, most climate-friendly means of transport, and we pledge to work together to fix the service. So I think, Stephen, people sometimes have a perception that you can just start a train and drive it. It doesn't work that way. There are so many safety features, and I think it's an emerging understanding of what it takes to manage not just the train service, but public transport on the whole.
One of the things about public transport is you've got to invest over the long term. You start investing now, maybe 5 years if you're lucky, but probably more likely 10 years, and this is probably an international figure, you start to really see the benefit. That makes it difficult for politicians to plan long term because they often think in much shorter electoral cycles. The reason I say all of that is this might be the real power of the City of Cape Town and Prasa and Metrorail agreeing to all work together. You need a lot of people to be aligned for a really long time to make this work.
Yeah, Stephen, I think that again is where we are at. I think this sort of citizenship movement that we are building, where there's respectful dialogue happening across multiple platforms with the mayor's office, with the provincial legislator, with citizenship movements, with commuters on a train, we're building a conversation that is quite healthy and sound. And it's amazing to see how people just pop up and participate in it because we want to move it out of the realm of politicizing this particular exercise. We want to move it into a citizenship-owned movement that goes beyond political terms. And that's very, very important. If we're going to build a rail service or a bus service or a rapid transport service, it's got to happen over the next 10 years. We can't have it hinged or hiked to a particular political person's term of office. It's far bigger than that. And as you rightly say, it's going to reap benefits within 10 years, 15 years from now. We need to make that investment now. That investment is monetarily. It's also in conversation. And I'm a big advocate for talking to people respectfully, dialoguing with justice, building this deliberative democracy concept that we are about. Because in that conversation, people are beginning to find common ground.
There's a really interesting discussion around public transport and bringing people together, and I mean that literally. So, for example, in Joburg, you have people who live in Diepsloot, they have to use taxis. People who live in Sandton, trust me on this, don't use taxis. The Cape Town example would probably be Khayelitsha, for example, coming into the CBD. The same applies. Someone who lives in the City Bowl, someone who lives in, I don't know, Bishop's Court or Clifton, probably don't allow taxis in Clifton. The point I'm trying to make is that if you have people in the same space using the same kind of transport to move around in a country as divided as ours, social cohesion could benefit. Oh, Lorenzo, again, we seem to have lost you. I don't know if it's the sound.
I'm there, Stephen.
There you
got
are.
me?
Right,
yeah.
Yes, I am.
Stephen, sorry.
Go for it.
Yeah, what I want to say is spatial apartheid has its recurring effects still in the way that we travel and live. And public transport is a way for us to get together. Now, redesigning a public transport system that overcomes spatial division, spatial apartheid, is a huge task. It's an additional complication onto designing an efficient public transport system, because we live so far from CBDs as poor people, and wealthy people are so cloistered in their suburbs that they have sufficient means to get to wherever they want to be, work or play or pleasure in a very short while with their motorized vehicles. So yeah, there's a huge design challenge within the South African public transport context to design a commuter system that caters for overcoming the barriers that was there by design. It wasn't just, happened as a matter of default. It was designed so that people can't access business districts and live close to amenities. So overcoming that is the huge challenge. But that, again, Stephen, is a matter for how we converse with each other. I'm so convinced that there's enough sensible heads in this country to sit down and talk about overcoming those challenges.
You've been talking and you've been focusing, because you live in Cape Town, on the situation there. And there are a couple of reasons why this is working in Cape Town. One is that there is already infrastructure and it's sort of been refurbished. Joburg also has infrastructure, although perhaps the infrastructure may be slightly different. Is there any reason why what's been happening in Cape Town, what you've been pushing for, what happened today in Cape Town with the officials, mayor getting on the train, is there any reason why that cannot happen in Joburg as well?
Now, Stephen, this can happen in any part of the country. I think, again, we've worked very hard over the last 4 months, to get people into the conversation. Without inviting them onto the rail system, we invited them into the conversation. So they were skeptics, they were agnostics, there were people who criticized us heavily during this process. But we slowly just built the message that the system is beginning to work. It was not perfect, it is not perfect. But by entering into the willingness to do dialogue, even with those who opposed us and criticized us, we began to build momentum. And so I am not for this sort of mass mobilization and now we're going to fix the trains. I think it's a gradual introduction of convincing people, persuading them through meaningful conversations with them at the level where they are at, to join this movement of people who are becoming active citizens in their own way. And so the mayor joins us today, but he's been a part of the conversation for quite a while. The provincial legislative staff joined us today. They've been in and commenting on Twitter feeds and sending text messages to say they appreciate what is happening. So I am patient that the process takes time, but the conversation must happen. We mustn't get tired of the conversation. We mustn't get tired of entering into dialogue. As hard as it is in the beginning, and as much criticism as one receives in the beginning, the benefits now are that people are joining. People are now willing to pitch up. Stephen, just one quick story. This morning, 2 people got on the train and said, my goodness, it's the first time I'm back on the train and I'm here because of your tweets. Can you believe that? I don't know them from anywhere. But they got up and said, we are here because we read your tweets on Twitter and decided to join this trip this morning.
Sure.
And one was an older woman and the other was a younger woman who works in a flea market. But old and young came on the train this morning because we had a conversation.
Shows you the power of activism, doesn't it? There's a lot that you're pushing for, and I think it's hard to argue against, but there are vested interests that will oppose you. We must talk about the taxi industry. I'm not going to make claims about the taxi industry without evidence, but we saw at one point, trains being set alight in a very suspicious manner. I don't know who is responsible for that. The point I'm trying to make is that there are very real vested interests who would oppose any change.
Yeah, and we're very aware of that. We're very aware that there are criminal elements. There are people that seeks to derail the service. I'm not saying that's the taxi industry at all. I think there are other interests at play here. People who simply do this to earn a living, to sell copper, to break into signal systems and steal valuable materials that are there. So there's a number of activists that are destabilizing this particular service. I think the taxi industry is a competitive industry. I don't see them as a sabotaging industry. They are a competition to the trains. And again, we need to find common ground with the taxi industry. They got to make a part of this multi-tiered public transport system. The taxi industry is here to stay. They're going to be a part of South Africa's public transport life forever. And the quicker we get around the table with each other, trains, buses, taxi owners, and all kinds of other public transport services, the better it is for us to talk. Again, I can't emphasize enough I have found common ground with an amazing amount of people who say, if you talk to us respectfully, if we can get common agreement, if we can advance a dialogue that is beneficial to everyone, why are we not in conversation with each other? So there's this presumption that we are dealing with enemies when we are actually dealing with fellow citizens. And I'm approaching this not as somebody who's trying to destabilize the service. I'm entering this conversation as somebody who's a fellow citizen, who's a taxi driver, who owns a bus company, and they all need to be in this room. It's how we advance this dialogue. I'm aware that there's money interest on the table. There's huge political interest that enters the room. There are people that have made a living out of destabilizing this service. I'm fully aware of who they are. But Stephen, we got to get to a point where we are dealing with this as 56 million, 60 million citizens in this country who are bold enough to enter into a dialogue with each other. That's the movement I am building. That's what I'm after. Because once we talk to each other, we can solve this.